Good evening. This is Pamela, and you're listening to Watchman on the Pod. We are going to go back to our book reading of 50 Years in the Church of Rome by Charles Chiniquy. We are in chapter 42. On the first Sabbath of November 1846, after a retreat of 8 days, I fell on my knees and asked as a favor to be received as a novice of the religious order of the Oblates of Mary Immaculate of Longagoul, whose object is to preach retreats, revivals among the people. No child of the Church of Rome ever enrolled himself with a more earnestness and sincerity under the mysterious banners of her monastic armies than I did that day. It is impossible to entertain more exalted views of the beauty and holiness of the monastic life than I had. To live among the holy men who had made the solemn vows of poverty, obedience, and chastity seemed to me the greatest and most blessed privilege which my God could grant on earth. Within the walls of the peaceful monastery of Longagoul, among those holy men who had long since put an impassable barrier between themselves and that corrupted world from the snares of which I was just escaping, my conviction was that I should see nothing but actions of the most exalted piety, and that the deadly weapons of the enemy could not pierce those walls protected by the Immaculate Mother of God. The frightful storms which had covered with wrecks the roaring sea where I had so often nearly perished could not trouble the calm waters of the port where my bark had just entered. Every one of the members of the community was to be like an angel of charity, humility, modesty, whose example was to guide my steps in the ways of God. My superior appeared to be less a superior than a father, whose protecting care by day and night would be a shield over me. Noah in the ark, safe from the raging waves which were destroying the world, did not feel more grateful to God than I was, when once in this holy solitude. The vow of perfect poverty was to save me from the cares of the world. Having hereafter no right to possess a cent, the world would become to me a paradise where food, clothing, and lodging would come without anxiety or care. My Father Superior would supply all these things without any other condition on my part than to love and obey a man of God, whose whole life was to be spent in guiding my steps in the ways of the most exalted evangelical virtues. Had not that Father himself made a solemn vow to renounce not only all the honors and dignities of the Church, that his whole mind and heart might be devoted to my holiness on earth and my salvation in heaven? How easy to secure that salvation now! I had only to look to that Father on earth and obey him as my Father in heaven. Yes, the will of that Father was to be, for me, the will of my God. Though I might err in obeying him, my errors would not be laid to my charge. To save my soul, I should have only to be like a corpse or a stick in the hands of my Father Superior. Without any anxiety or any responsibility whatsoever on my own, I was to be led to heaven as the newborn child in the arms of his loving mother, without any fear, thoughts, or anxiety of his own. With the Christian poet I could have sung, "Rocks and storms I fear no more, when on that eternal shore drop the anchor, furl the sail, I am safe within the veil." But how short were to be these fine dreams of my poor deluded mind, when on my knees Father Giogus handed me the great solemnity, the Latin books of the rules of that monastic order, which is their real gospel, warning me that it was a secret book, and that there were things in it I ought not to reveal to anyone, and it made me solemnly promise that I would never show it to anyone outside the order. When alone the next morning in my cell, I thanked God and the Virgin Mary for the favors of the last day, and the thought came involuntarily to my mind, have you not 1,000 times heard and said that the Holy Church of Rome absolutely condemns and anathematizes secret societies? And do you not belong today to a secret society? How can you reconcile the solemn promise of secrecy you made last night with the anathemas hurled by your popes against secret societies? After having in vain tried in my mind to reconcile two things, I happily remembered that I was a corpse, that I had forever given up my private judgment, that my only business now was to obey. Does a corpse argue against those who turn it from side to side? Is it not in perfect peace, whatever may be the usage to which it is exposed, or to whatever place it is dragged? Shall I lose the rich crown which is before me at my first step in the ways of perfection? I bade my rebellious intelligence to be still, my private judgment to be mute, and to distract my mind from this first temptation. I read that book of rules with the utmost attention. I had not gone through it all before I understood why it was kept from the eyes of the curates and the other secular priests. To my unspeakable amazement, I found that from the beginning to the end it speaks with the most profound contempt for them all. I said to myself, what would be the indignation of the curates if they should suspect that these strangers from France have such a bad opinion of them all? Would the good curates receive them as angels from heaven and raise them so high in the esteem of the people if they knew that the first thing an oblate has to learn is that the secular priest is, today, steeped in immorality, ignorance, wordiness, laziness, gluttony, etc., that he is the disgrace of the church, which would speedily be destroyed? Was she not provincially sustained and kept in the ways of God by the holy monastic men whom she nurses as her only hope? Clear as the light of the sun on a bright day, the whole fabric of the order of the Oblates presented itself to my mind as the most perfect system of Phariseeism the world has ever seen. The Oblate, who studies his book of rules, his only gospel, must have his mind filled with the idea of his superior holiness, not only over the poor, sinful, secular priest, but over everyone else. The oblate alone is Christian, holy, and sacred. The rest of the world is lost. The oblate alone is the salt of the earth, the light of the world. I said to myself, is it to attain to this pharisaical perfection that I have left my beautiful and dear parish of Kamarowska and given up the honorable position which my God had given me in my country? However, after some time spent in these sad and despondent reflections, I again felt angry with myself. I quickly directed my mind to the frightful, unsuspected, and numberless scandals I had known in almost every parish I had visited. I remembered the drunkenness of the curate, the impurities of this, the ignorance of another, the worldliness and absolute want of faith of others, and concluded that, after all, the oblates were not far from the truth in their bad opinion of the secular clergy. I ended my sad afflictions by saying to myself, after all, if the oblates live a life of holiness, as I expect to find here, is it a crime that they should see, feel, and express among themselves the differences which exist between a regular and a secular clergy? Am I come here to judge and condemn those holy men? No, I came here to save myself from the practice of the most heroic Christian virtues, the first of which is that I should absolutely and forever give up my private judgment, consider myself as a corpse in the hand of my superiors. With all the fervor of my soul, I prayed to God and to the Virgin Mary day and night that week that I might attain the supreme state of perfection, when I would have no will, no judgment of my own. The days of that first week passed very quickly, spent in prayer, reading and meditation of the Scriptures, study of ecclesiastical history, and ascetical books from 5:30 in the morning till 9:30 at night. The meals were taken at the regular hours of 7, 12, and 6 o'clock, during which, with rare exceptions, silence was kept and pious books were read. The quality of the food was good, but at first, before they got a female cook to preside over the kitchen, everything was so unclean that I had to shut my eyes at meals, not to see what I was eating. I should have complained, but had not my lips been sealed by that strange monastic view of perfection that every religious man is a corpse. What does a corpse care about the cleanliness or the uncleanness of what is put into its mouth? The third day, having drank at breakfast a glass of milk, which was literally mixed with the dung of a cow, my stomach rebelled, a circumstance which I regretted exceedingly, contributing it to my want of monastic perfection. I envied the high state of holiness of the other fathers who had so perfectly attained to the sublime perfection of submission that they could drink that impure milk just as if it had been clean. Everything went on well the first week, with the exception of a dreadful scare I had at the dinner of the first Friday. Just after eating soup, when listening with the greatest attention to the reading of the life of a saint, I suddenly felt as if the devil had taken hold of my feet. I threw down my knife and fork and cried at the top of my lungs, my God, what is there?" And as quick as lightning, I jumped on my chair to save myself from Satan's grasp. My cries were soon followed by an inexpressible burst of convulsive laughter from everyone. "But what does this mean? Who has taken a hold of my feet?" I asked. Father Gugunas tried to explain the matter to me, but it took him a considerable time. When he began to speak, an irrepressible burst of laughter prevented his saying a word. The fits of laughter became still more uncontrollable on account of the seriousness with which I was repeatedly asking them who could have taken hold of my feet. At last someone said, "It is Father Lager, who wanted to kiss your feet." At the same time, Lager walked on his hands and feet, his face covered with sweat and dust and dirt, was crawling out with under the table, literally rolling on the floor in such an uncontrollable fit of laughter that he was unable to stand on his feet. Of course, one understood that no devil had tried to drag me by my feet, but that it was simply one of the Father Oblates who, to go through one of the common practices of humility in that monastery, had crawled under the table to take hold of the feet of everyone and kiss them. I joined with the rest of the community and laughed to my heart's content. Not many days after this, we were going, after tea, from the dining room to the chapel, to pass 5 or 10 minutes in adoration of the wafer god, who had 2 doors to cross, and it was pretty dark. Being the last who had entered the monastery, I had to walk first, the other monks following me. We were reciting with a loud voice the Latin psalm, Misericordiae mea Deus. We were all marching pretty fast, when suddenly my feet met a large, though unseen object, and down I fell, and rolled on the floor. My next companion did the same, and rolled over me, and so did 5 or 6 others, who, in the dark, had also struck their feet on that object. In a moment, we were 5 or 6 holy fathers, rolling on each other on the floor, unable to rise up, splitting our sides with convulsive laughter. After Father Burnett, in one of his fits of humility, had left the table a little before the rest, with the permission of the superior, to lay himself flat on the floor across the door. Not suspecting it and unable to see anything from the want of sufficient light, I had entangled my feet on that living corpse, as also the rest of those who were walking too close behind me to stop before the tumbling over one another. No words can describe my feelings of shame when I saw, almost every day, some performance of this kind of going on under the name of Christian humility. In vain I tried to silence the voice of my intelligence, which was crying to me day and night that this was a mere diabolical caricature of the humility of Christ. Striving to silence my untamed reason by telling it that it had no right to speak and argue and criticize within the holy walls of the monastery, it nevertheless spoke louder day after day, telling me that such acts of humility were a mockery. In vain I said to myself, "Chiniquy, thou art not come here to philosophize on this and that, but to sanctify thyself by becoming like a corpse which has no preconceived ideas, no acquired store of knowledge, no rule of common sense to guide it. Poor, wretched, sinful Chiniquy, thou art here to save thyself by admiring every iota of the holy rules of your superiors, and to obey every word of their lips." I felt angry against myself and unspeakably sad when, after whole weeks and months of effort, not only to silence the voice of my reason, but to kill it, it had more life than ever, and was more and more loudly protesting against the unmanly, unchristian, and ridiculous daily usages and rules of the monastery. I envied the humble piety of the other good fathers, who were apparently so happy, having conquered themselves so completely, as to destroy that haughty reason which was constantly rebelling in me. Twice every week I went to reveal to my guide and confessor, Father Allard, the master of novices, my interior struggles, my constant, though vain efforts to subdue my rebellious reason. He always gladdened me with the promise that, sooner or later, I should have that interior perfect peace which is promised to the humble monk when he has attained the superior monistic perfection of considering himself as a corpse, as regard the rules and will of his superiors. My sincere and constant efforts to reconcile myself to the rules of the monastery were, however, soon to receive a new and rude check. I had read in the Book of Rules that a true monk must closely watch those who live with him, and secretly report to his superior the defects and sins which he detects in them. The first time I read that strange rule, my mind was so taken up by other things that I did not pay much attention to it. But the second time I studied that clause, the blush came to my face, and in spite of myself, I said, "Is it possible that we are a band of spies?" I was not long in seeing the disastrous effects of the most degrading and immoral rule. One of the fathers, for whom I had particular affection for his many good qualities, and who had many times given me the sincere proof of his friendship, said to me one day, "For God's sakes, my dear Father Chiniquy, tell me if it was you who denounced me to the superior for having said that the conduct of Father Gugunas towards me was uncharitable." "No, my dear friend," I answered, "I never said such a thing against you, for two reasons. The first is that you have never said a word in my presence which could give me the idea that you had such an opinion of our good Father Superior. The second reason is that though you might have told me anything of that kind, I would prefer to have my tongue cut and eaten by dogs than to be a spy and denounce you." "I am glad to know that," he rejoined, "for I was told by some of the fathers that you were the one who had reported me to the superior as guilty, though I am innocent of that offense. But I could not believe it." He added with tears, "I regret having left my parish to be an oblate on account of that abominable law which we are sworn to fulfill. That law makes a real hell of this monastery, and I suppose of all the monastic orders, for I think it is a general rule with all the religious houses. When you have passed more time here, you will see that that law of detection puts an insurmountable wall between us all. It destroys every spring of Christian and social happiness." "I understand perfectly well what you say," I answered him. "The last time I was alone with Father Superior, he asked me why I had said that the present Pope was an old fool. He persisted in telling me that I must have said it for, he added, one of our most reliable fathers has assured me you said it. Well, my dear Father Superior, I answered him, that reliable father has told you a big lie. I never said such a thing, for the good reason that I sincerely think that our present Pope is one of the wisest that ever ruled the Church. I added, now I understand why there is so much unpleasantness in our mutual intercourse during the hours we are allowed to talk. I see that nobody dares to speak his mind on any grave subject. The conversations are colorless and without life. That is just the reason, answered my friend, when some of the fathers like you and me would prefer to be hung rather than become spies. The great majority of them, particularly among the French priests recently imported from France, will not hear 10 words from your lips on any subject without finding an opportunity of reporting 8 of them as unbecoming and unchristian to the superiors. I do not say that it is always through malice that they give such a false report. It is more through want of judgment. They are very narrow-minded. They do not understand the half of what they hear in its true sense, and they give their false impressions to the superiors, who unfortunately encourage that system of spying as the best way of transforming every one of us into corpses. As we are never confronted with our false accusers, we can never know them, and we lose confidence in each other. Thus it is that the sweetest and holiest springs of true Christian love are forever dried up. It is on this spying system, which is the curse and the hell of our monastic houses, that a celebrated French writer who had been a monk himself wrote of all the monks, quote, I can't say those words because it's, and here's the translation. Monks enter a monastery without knowing each other. They live there without loving each other, and they depart from each other without any regret. Wow. However, though I sincerely deplored that there was such a law of espionage among us, I tried to persuade myself that it was like the dark spots of the sun, which do not diminish its beauty, its grandeur, and its innumerable blessings. The society of the Oblates was still, to me, blessed ark, where I should find a sure shelter against the storms which were desolating the rest of the world. Not long after my reception as a novice, the providence of God put before our eyes one of those terrible wrecks which would make the strongest of us tremble. Suddenly, at the hour of breakfast, the superior of seminary of St. Sulpice and grand vicar of the diocese of Montreal, the Reverend Mr. Quibbler, knocked at our door to rest an hour and breakfast with us, went on his way to France. This unfortunate priest, who was among the best orators and the best looking men Montreal had ever seen, had lived such a profligate life with his penitent nuns and ladies of Montreal that a cry of indignation from the whole people had forced Bishop Bourget to send him back to France. Our Father Superior took the opportunity of the fall of that talented priest to make us bless God for having gathered us behind the walls of monastery, where the efforts of the enemy were powerless. But, alas, we were soon to know at our own expense that the heart of man is weak and deceitful everywhere. It was not long after the public fall of the Grand Vicar of Montreal when a fine-looking widow was engaged to preside over our kitchen. She was more than 40 years old and had very good manners. Unfortunately, she had not been 4 months in the monastery when she fell in love with her father confessor, one of the most pious of the French Father Oblates. The modern Adam was not stronger than the old one against the charms of the new Eve. Both were found in an evil hour, forgetting one of the holy laws of God. The guilty priest was punished, and the weak woman dismissed, but an unspeakable shame remained upon us all. I would have preferred to have my sentence of death than the news of such a fall inside the walls of that house where I had so foolishly believed that Satan could not lay snares. From that day it was the will of God that the strange and beautiful illusions which had brought me to that monastery should fade away one after the other, like the white mist which conceals the bright rays of the morning sun. The oblates began to appear to me pretty much like other men. Till then I had looked at them with my eyes shut, and I had seen nothing but the glittering colors with which my imagination was painting them. From that day I studied them with my eyes open and saw them just as they were. In the spring of 1847, having a severe indisposition, the doctor ordered me to go to the Hotel de Montreal, which was then near the splendid St. Mary's Church. I made there for the first time the acquaintance of a venerable old nun, who was very talkative. She was one of the superiors of the house. Her family name was Euratubis. Her mind was still full of indignation at the bad conduct of 2 Father Oblates who, under the pretext of sickness, had lately come to her monastery to seduce the young nuns who were serving them. She told me how she had turned them out ignominiously, forbidding them ever to come again under any pretext into the hospital. She was young when Bishop Lergout, being driven away from the Sulpician Seminary of Montreal in 1823, had taken refuge with his secretary, the Reverend Ignace Bourget, into the modest walls of that nunnery. She told me how the nuns had soon to repent, having received the bishop with his secretary and other priests. It was nearly the ruin of our community. The intercourse of the priest with a certain number of nuns, she said, was the cause of so much disorder and scandal that I was deputed with some other nuns to the bishop to respectfully request him not to prolong his stay in our nunnery. I told him, in my name, and in the name of many others, that if he would not comply with our legitimate request, we should instantly leave the house, go back to our families, and get married, and it was better to be honestly married than to continue to live as the priest, even our father confessors, wanted us to do. As she had given me several other spicy stories of those interesting distant days, I asked her if she had known Maria Monk when she was in their house, and what she thought of her book, Awful Disclosures. I have known her well, she said. She spent 6 months with us. I have read her book, which was given me that I might refute it, but after reading it, I refused to have anything to do with that deplorable exposure. There are surely some inventions and suppositions in that book, but there is sufficient amount of truth to cause all nunneries to be pulled down by the people, if only the half of them were known to the public. She then said to me, "For God's sakes, do not reveal these things to the world till the last one of us is dead, if God spares you." She then covered her face with her hands, burst into tears, and left the room. I remained horrified. Her words fell upon me as a thunderbolt. I regretted ever having heard them, though I was determined to respect her request not to reveal the terrible secret she had entrusted to me. My God knows that I never repeated a word of it till now, but I think it is my duty to reveal to my country and the whole world the truth on that grave subject, as it was given me by a most respectable and impeachable eyewitness. The terrible secrets which Sister Euterpe had revealed to me rendered my stay in the Hotel Dieu as unpleasant as it had been agreeable at first. Though not quite recovered, I left the same day from Longueuil, where I entered the monastery with a heavy heart. The day before, 2 of the fathers had come back from a 2 to 3 month evangelical excursion among the lumbermen who were cutting wood in the forest along the Ottawa River and its tributaries. From 1 to 100-mile diversion from the deplorable things I had recently learned. But only one of those fathers could be seen, and his conversation was anything but interesting and pleasant. There was evidently a dark cloud around him, and the other oblate, his companion, where was he? The very day of his arrival he had been ordered to keep his room and make a retreat of 10 days, during which he was forbidden to speak to anyone. I inquired from a devoted friend among the old oblates the reason of such a strange thing. After promising never to reveal to the superiors the sad secret he trusted me with, he said, "Poor Father Dehas seduced one of his fair penants on the way. She was a married woman, the lady of the house, where our missionaries used to receive the most cordial hospitality. The husband, having discovered the infidelity of his wife, came very near killing her. He ignominiously turned out the 2 fathers and wrote a terrible letter to the superior. The companion of the guilty father denounced him and confessed everything to the superior, who has seen that the letter of the enraged husband was only giving too true and a correct version of the whole unfortunate and shameful occurrence. Now the poor, weak father, for his penance, is condemned to 10 days of seclusion from the rest of the community. He must pass that whole time in prayer, fasting, and acts of humiliation dictated by the superior." "Do these deplorable facts occur very often among the Father Oblates?" I asked. My friend raised his eyes, filled with tears, to heaven, and with a deep sigh he answered, "Dear Father Chiniquy, would to God that I might be able to tell you that it is the first crime of that nature committed by an oblate. But alas, you know, by what has occurred with our female cook not long ago, that it is not the first time that some of our fathers have brought disgrace upon us all. And you know also the abominable life of Father Telemont with the 2 nuns at Ottawa." "If it be so," I replied, "where is the spiritual advantage of the regular clergy over the secular?" "The only advantage I see," answered my friend, "is that the regular clergy gives himself with more impunity to every kind of debauch and lasciviousness than the secular, the monks being concealed from the eyes of the public inside the walls of their monastery, where nobody, or at least very few people, have any access, are more easily conquered by the devil, and more firmly kept in his chains than the secular priest. The sharp eyes of the public and the daily intercourse the secular priests have with their relations and parishioners form a powerful and salutary restraint upon the bad inclinations of our depraved nature. In the monastery there is no restraint except the childish and ridiculous punishments of retreats, kissing of the floor or of the feet, prostration upon the ground, as Father Burnett did a few days after your coming among us. There is surely more hypocrisy and selfishness among the regular than the secular clergy. That great social organization which forms the human family is a divine work. Yes, those great social organizations which are called the city, the township, the country, the parish, and the household, where everyone is called to work in the light of day, is a divine organization and makes society as strong, pure, and holy as it can be. I confess that there are also terrible temptations and deplorable falls there, but the temptations are not so uncurable and the falls not so irreparable as in these dark recesses and unhealthy prisons raised by Satan only for the birds of night, called monasteries or nunneries. The priest and the woman who falls in the midst of a well-organized Christian society break the hearts of the beloved mother, covers with shame a venerable father, cause the tears of a cherished sisters and brothers to flow, pierce with a barbed arrow the hearts of 1,000 of friends, they forever lose their honor and good name. These considerations are so many provincial, I dare say divine, shields to protect the sons and daughters of Eve against their own frailty. The secular priests and the women shrink before throwing themselves into such a bottomless abyss of shame, misery, and regret. But behind the thick and dark walls of the monastery or the nunnery, what has the fallen monk or nun to fear? Nobody will hear of it. No bad consequences worth mentioning will follow, except a few days of retreat, some insignificant, childish, ridiculous penances, which the most devoted in the monastery are practicing almost every day. As you ask me in earnest, what are the advantages of a monastic life over a secular and a moral and social point of view, I will answer you. In the monastery, man, as the image of God, forgets his divine origin, loses his dignity, and as a Christian, he loses the most holy weapons Christ has given to his disciples to fight the battle of life. He at once and forever loses that law of self-respect and respect for others, which is one of the most powerful and legitimate barriers against vice. Yes, that great and divine law of self-respect, which God himself has implanted in the heart of every man and woman who live in a Christian society, is completely destroyed in the monastery and nunnery. The foundation of perfection in the monk and the nun is that they must consider themselves as corpses. Do you not see that this principle strikes at the root of all that God has made good, grand, and holy in man? Does it not sweep away every idea of holiness, purity, greatness? Every principle of life which the gospel of Christ had for its mission to reveal to the fallen children of Adam? What self-respect can we expect from a corpse? And what respect can a corpse feel for the other corpse which surround it? Thus, it is that the very idea of monastic perfection carries with it the destruction of all that is good, pure, holy, and spiritual in the religion of the gospel. It destroys the very idea of life to put death into its place. It is for that reason that you study the true history, not the lying history of monachism. You will find the details of corruption impossible anywhere else, not even among the lowest houses of prostitution. Read the memoirs of Cipto di Risi, one of the most pious and intelligent bishops of our church has ever had, and you will see that the monks and the nuns of Italy lived the very life of the brutes in the fields. Yes, read the terrible revelations of what is going on amongst those unfortunate men and women, whom in the iron hand of the monachism keeps tied in their dark dungeons. You will hear from the very lips of the nuns that the monks are more free with them than the husbands are with their legitimate wives. You will see that every one of these monastic institutions is a new Sodom. The monistic axiom that the highest point of perfection is attained only when you consider yourself a corpse in the hand of your superior is anti-social and anti-Christian. It is simply diabolical. It transforms into a vile machine that man, whom God had created in his likeness and made forever free, it degrades below the brute that man whom Christ by his death has raised to the dignity of a child of God and an inheritor of an eternal kingdom in heaven. Everything is mechanical, material, false in the life of a nun and a monk. A monk and a nun. Even the best virtues are deceptions and lies. The monks and the nuns being perfect only when they have renounced their own free will and intelligence to become corpses, can have neither virtues or vices. Their best actions are mechanical. Their acts of humility to crawl under the table and kiss the feet of each other, or to make a cross on a dirty floor with the tongue, or lie down in the dust to let the rest of the monks or the nuns pass over them. Have you not remarked how those so-called monks speak with the utmost contempt of the rest of the world? One must have opportunities, as I have had, of seeing the profound hatred which exists among all monastic orders against each other. How the Domitians have always hated the Franciscans, and how they both hate the Jesuits, who pay them back in the same coin. What a strong and nameless hatred divides the oblates, to whom we belong, from the Jesuits. The Jesuits never lose an opportunity of showing us their supreme contempt. You are aware that, on account of those bad feelings, it is absolutely forbidden to an oblate to confess to a Jesuit, as we know it is forbidden to the Jesuits to confess to an oblate or to any other priest. I need not tell you, for you know that their vow of poverty is a mask to help them to become rich with more rapidity than the rest of the world. It is not under the mask of that vow that the monks of England, Scotland, and France became the masters of the richest lands of those countries, which the nations were forced by bloody revolutions to wrench from their grasp. Is it not still under the mask of extreme poverty that the monks of Italy are among the richest proprietors in that unfortunate country? I have seen much more of the world than you. When a young priest, I was the chaplain, confessor, and intimate friend of the Duchess de Berry, the mother of Henry V, now the only legitimate king of France. When, in the midst of those great and rich princes and nobles of France, I never saw such a love of money, of honor, of vainglory as I have seen among the monks since I have become one of them. When the Duchess de Berry finished her provincial work in France after making the false step which ruined her, I threw myself into the religious order of Chartres. I lived several years in their palatal monastery of Rome, have cultivated, enjoyed their sweet fruits and their magnificent gardens. But I was not there long without seeing the fatal error I had committed in becoming a monk. During the many years I resided in that splendid mansion, where laziness, stupidity, filthiness, gluttony, superstition, tediousness, ignorance, pride, and unmentionable immoralities, with very few exceptional cases, reigned supreme, I had every opportunity to know what was going on in their midst. Life soon became an unbearable burden. But for the hope I had of breaking my fetters, at last I found out that the best, if not the only way of doing this, was to declare to the Pope that I wanted to go and preach the gospel to the savages of America, which was and is still true. I made my declaration, and by the Pope's permission, the doors of my goal were opened, with the condition that I should join the Order of Oblates Immaculate, in connection with which I should evangelize the savages of the Rocky Mountains. I have found among the monks of Canada the very same things I have seen among those of France and Italy. With very few exceptions, they are all corpses, absolutely dead to every sentiment of true honesty and real Christianity. They are putrid carcasses which have lost the dignity of manhood. My dear Father Chiniquy, he added, I trust you as I trust myself when I tell you for your own good a secret which is known to God alone. When I am on the Rocky Mountains, I will raise myself up as the eagles of those vast countries, and I shall go up to the regions of liberty, light and life. I will cease being a corpse to become what my God has made me, a free and intelligent man. I will cease to be a corpse in order to become one of the redeemed of Christ, who serve God in spirit and in truth. Christ is the light of the world. Manichaeism is its night. Christ is the strength, the glory, the life of man. Manichaeism is a decay, shame, and death. Christ died to make us free. The monastery is built up to make slaves of us. Christ died that we might be raised in the dignity of children of God. Manichaeism is established to bring us down much below the living brutes, for it transforms us into corpse. Christ is the highest conception of humanity. Manichaeism is its lowest. Yes, I hope my God will soon give me the favor I have asked so long. When I shall be on the top of the Rocky Mountains, I will forever break my fetters. I will rise from my tomb. I will come out from among the dead to sit at the table of the redeemed and eat the bread of the living children of God. I do not regret that remarkable monk, whose abridged views on Manichaeism I have here given. Should have requested me never to give his name, when he allows me to tell some of his adventures, which will make a most interesting romance. Faithful to his promise, he went, as an oblate, to preach to the savages of the Rocky Mountains, and there, without noise, he slipped out of their hands, broke his chains to live the life of a freedman of Christ in the holy bonds of a Christian marriage with a respectable American lady. Weak and timid soldier that I once, frightened by the ruins spread everywhere on the battlefield, I looked around to find shelter against the impending danger. I thought that the monastery of the Oblates of Mary Immaculate was one of those strong towers built by my God, where the arrows of the enemy could not reach me, and I threw myself into it. But, hardly beginning to hope that I was out of danger behind those dark and high walls, when I saw them shaking like a drunken man, and the voice of God passed like a hurricane over me. Suddenly the high towers and walls around me fell to the ground and were turned into dust. Not one stone remained on another. And I heard a voice saying to me, "Soldier, come out and get in the light of the sun. Trust no more in the walls built by the hand of man. They are nothing but dust. Come and fight in the open day under the eyes of God, protected only by the gospel banner of Christ. Come out from behind those walls. They are diabolical deception, a snare, and a fraud." I listened to the voice, and I bade adieu to the inmates of the monastery of the Oblates of Mary Immaculate. When, on the 1st of November, 1847, I pressed them on my heart for the last time, I felt the burning tears of them falling on my cheeks, and my tears moistened their faces, for they loved me, and I loved them. I had met their several noble hearts and precious souls worthy of a better fate. Oh, if I could have, at the price of my life, given them the light and liberty which my merciful God had given me. But they were in the dark, and there was no power in me to change their darkness into light. The hand of God brought me back to my dear Canada, that I might again offer it to the sweat and labors, the love of life of the least of its sons. Wow. I don't even know what to say. That's horrible. Whew. All right, brothers and sisters. Keep those that are blinded by this Catholic religion. It is a pagan religion. It is a demonic religion. Keep those people in your prayers, that the Father will open their eyes and reveal the truth to them. Come out from amongst her, my people. I hear God crying to you. I love you all so very much. Keep your eyes on Jesus. Your nose in the book, which is the Word of God. And embed the Word of God upon the tablets of your hearts, so you will not sin against God or be deceived. Till next time, brothers and sisters, be blessed.